There's a couple of y'all, maybe more will show up. I just posted in the thing. All right, and that's better than I had one person in my first and second period. It was great. Some of that might be because yesterday I had to be a hall monitor for ninth grade's practice SAT, and so I couldn't stream yesterday, and I feel like kids, or at least the younger kids, are like, oh, maybe he's not streaming all week. That's not what I said, but so no homework this week. Congratulations, you're welcome. I guess I would have needed to assign that on Tuesday, but I'll give y'all a little slack there. I also have a whole bunch of grades. I already have like almost as many grades as we're supposed to have for a single quarter, so kind of a reason to give us some slack. We'll introduce chapter 25 right now and do some practice with it tomorrow. There will be no stream on Friday, and you'll just take the chapter 25 vocab quiz. Real quick, let me jump out of this just to like get an idea of the rest of the school year, because it is like a full month, but it feels like it's going to fly by because we got a couple of weird weeks coming up. This week is weird because it's the first time I'm streaming and it's a Wednesday. It's kind of like last week. Next week, I will be proctoring, as far as I have just found out, y'all's CMAS on Tuesday and Wednesday. So whatever classes you have in the morning on those days, I don't think you'll have them that day. I think you'll just be taking the PSAT until like 11:30 or something. And don't quote me. That could change. I could be a little wrong, but I think that's right. I talked to Miss Moore yesterday about it. And sorry, that is the 4th and the 5th. I'm pointing at the wrong days. But we will be able to proceed with this chapter on 3 of the days of next week. And then we could probably finish the chapter in like the middle of this week. At that point, I'd either introduce part of 26 or just get into review, because at that point we have like a week and some change to do review for our final, which will be on roughly chapter, what would it be? Probably like 17 through 25, 17 or 18 through 25. But 17 is relative clauses, 18 and 19 is the passive voice. 20 and 22 or 4th and 5th declension. 21 was just like more passive voice. So anyway, it's really only a handful of concepts. And we will have at least a full week to review it this week. And then, of course, the last week of May, it's just a bunch of half days. You're coming in, taking your final, and that's it. Yeah, I guess we're just going to have, let's see, who, okay. That's weird. Caden made a big deal about wanting to, or maybe he just because he asked me about it. It's cool, Caden. Let's see. Okay, let's get into it. This is the vocab for the chapter. I don't have it in front of me. I'm not sure what page it is, but it's probably something like, I'm finding it. I think it's page 206, 205, 205. Let me add that real quick. I can never decide if I want to stay full screen or not. I really like having the mouse. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'll put, I guess, just 10 of these on a Google Forms on Friday, and y'all can take that. It should be really easy. So this week is basically too easy, but it's cool. All right. Okay. Let's get into it. This was on the translation quiz from last week, which went pretty well. I can't totally remember. I actually feel like the average was a little low, but I didn't actually calculate it or anything. But yeah, servitude of all types, of all kinds. Must, okay, the must. Wait. Okay, I was very lenient on this. And maybe there's a reason, because like, why did it say has been? But it's supposed to be must. Sorry about, I don't know what that is. But yeah, like I said, I was kind of lenient on this. It's supposed to be must because this is a passive paraphrastic right here with the ND. Weird. I don't know why that slide was off before I made that change just now. It's always something. Must be suppressed by all men throughout. Through is how we usually take per, but I feel like throughout actually sounds better. Throughout the whole world. So yeah, the must was good. At least some people did that, but I did see a lot of people not doing the must. And now I'm worried that's my fault. Sorry. This was a dative of agent, though. I had the option ablative of agent. That was a trap. It was kind of tricky. We still have ablatives of agents with normal passive verbs, but for whatever reason, this specific passive periphrastic gets a specifically dative of agent, not an ablative. That's like not a huge deal though. It's like, especially when datives and ablatives are usually identical. I wonder why this was slightly like why it gets a dative of agent instead of an ablative. But yeah, it was dative. It definitely wasn't an indirect object or direct object. This one I definitely didn't mess up in terms of the slide. And it was a perfect passive participle with the tyrant having been overcome, or just with the tyrant overcome or conquered, I guess. The citizens and even servants. Okay, atque has, it's not quite just et. It's a little more like et. It's almost well, it's just like and so or and also. The citizens and also the servants received or took liberty and justice, or liberty and like rights. I guess justice is probably the best sounding way to do that. But again, that was a perfect passive participle because it's just the fourth principal part of supero superare. It's not like the present stem with a NS, NT, third declension style thing. That'd be like superon, superanti or superantibus, like with the tyrant overcoming. That would be a present active. This was perfect passive though. All right, and the one that we didn't do, or the one that y'all spot translated, was this. I can't remember. I think Cami did this really well, but a lot of people came close. It'd be like with the labor having been done. I do think I glossed ago agra egi octum, so it's just like with the work or the labor having been done. Again, that is perfect passive. It's not present active. That'd be like agens or agenti agentibus. With the labor working, that wouldn't be the sentence, but with the work having been done, we will soon, I gloss mocks because I don't think we actually have that. I just wanted to use it, have peace or leisure. All right, and that is so true because we are about a month out from our incredible summer break. Okay, so let's get into this chapter. I like this chapter. It's about something called an indirect statement, and we get these new types of infinitives. I don't think this is too complicated, and I also think it's one of those things like relative clauses and maybe the passive voice, where once you get it and you're not intimidated by it anymore, it's kind of like, oh, like how did we not have this for so long? It's something that we use in language all the time. But I'm starting out by talking about these different infinitives. So I think we all kind of thought that there was just really like one, maybe two types of infinitives. The present active ones that end in ARE, long ERE, ERE, or long IRE. That just means like to verb, right? It's the unconjugated version of it. And then in chapter 18, we did learn about passive infinitives. So depending on the conjugation, it's kind of like you just take the active ones and you swap out the E at the end of it for a long I. So I will say third conjugation, it's not even ER, it goes straight into the long I. So something like duco ducera, if you wanted to say to be led, that would just be duki. It would not be dukery, which even sounds kind of funny. So maybe that's the reason why. And fourth conjugation is straightforward. It's instead of the long I, it's long I or I. And of course we translate that as to be verbed. But it turns out infinitives can actually have tense, and that's like not something we knew before. So if you want to have a perfect tense infinitive, you take the perfect stem, meaning the third principal part of a verb, which is to review like ago, egra, or ago, agra, egi, right? Not all verbs do this, but a lot of them like change the entire vowel, or they just kind of like shift slightly to be in that perfect stem mode. And you take that and you add it to this ending, issa, instead of essa, which is like to be, the infinitive of sum essa. It's issa. And that would be translated like it'd be agissa here, to have led. So it's still kind of an infinitive in that like you want the to part, but the have makes it clear that it's in the past tense. There's also perfect passive, and that kind of should look familiar to us. That basically looks like the perfect passive participle that we learned in chapter 23. So it's really just the fourth principal part plus essa. Whereas just octus would be like having been done. Octus esse would be like to have been verb. What did I say led? The heck? Oh, okay, weird. Yeah. So ago ago is horrible. It can mean to lead. Okay. We have duco dukera, but it can mean lead, spend, pass. It's a nutty verb, right? Okay, last two things real quick. The future active infinitive, you take the fourth principal part, just like we did for the perfect passive participle, and we squeeze the UR between the stem and whatever gendered and numbered ending we have. So again, that is the same as the future active participle that we learned in chapter 23. But you just add it to essa, okay? That's what's making it an infinitive, to be about to be led, or to be about to lead. This is very rare. You will not see this much because it sounds so crazy. And then I'm not even going to talk about this future passive one because you will not see it. I mean, it'd be translated as to be about to be led. That sounds crazy. All right, this is the most complicated part of it, so I apologize for leading with that. Let's get into what an actual indirect statement is, because that is actually easy to understand. But let's build up to it by talking about how we've used our infinitives previously. So you might not think of this as one of our uses, but I think they do have a sententi antiqui all the way back in chapter 1 that does this. So an infinitive can actually be a subject. It's pretty rare, but it happens. So something like this, errare est humana, to err, meaning like to make a mistake, is human. That's like a kind of famous quote from, I believe, Seneca, a playwright, a nature home playwright, I forget. But like it's weird, but technically it's the subject of this sentence, this infinitive. To make a mistake, to do an unconjugated verb is blah, blah, blah. And so it is the subject of the sentence, right? So that's one use. We don't really see it. I feel like there was maybe one other time we saw it. The really common use that we do see all the time is when it's a complement of a verb that takes a complement, like possum or debeo or audeo, to dare. And so this would be I can think. And it's, whereas the initial verb is conjugated, the verb that is complement to said initial verb will not be, and so it'll be an infinitive. I should, or I ought to think. So think is an infinitive, right? This is all just review at this point. It can be a direct object instead of a subject. Again, this might not, we've done this recently, but maybe you weren't thinking of it as actually being a DO, but that'd be like he or she commanded. This is from this verb that I think a lot of us don't know, iubeo. Them, commanded them to come. So eos, it's kind of like commands, or command here takes almost double direct objects, because eos is also the DO, but I'm just making venire red to show that it is being thought of as a direct object here. And then what we're going to get this chapter is that it'll just be the main verb of something called an indirect statement. What is an indirect statement? It's something way easier to grasp than infinitives, which starting now, I'm going to teach infinitives after I explain what an indirect statement is. Okay, so what is an indirect statement? It's not this. This is something we've already done in some of our stories where you use quotations and a comma potentially, or a period depending, and you're basically expressing dialogue, right? Like if you're reading a book, this is the way dialogue happens. And so this is a direct statement. Julia is a good student, the teacher says. I can use deco decra, or this kind of weird verb that we've seen sometimes in stories in quit. Have we seen that? It just means says. It's kind of like a verb that's really only used for like he or she said. Whereas an indirect statement is when in English we're saying that somebody said something, but it's not actually dialogue. Like the teacher says that blah, 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 blah. And that is a good indicator when you're using indirect statements in English to kind of like signal that you're about to start an indirect statement. In a direct statement, you don't do that. You don't say, the teacher says that Julie is a good student. If you actually are having dialogue happen in a story, you just, you use the proper punctuation, and that's how people understand that somebody's saying something. But anyway, it's good to know that that is a good way to understand that an indirect statement is about to occur. It's a different kind of that than like a demonstrative pronoun that, or a relative pronoun one. So in Latin, this would be accomplished, like this sentence right here, the teacher says that Julia is a good student, be accomplished by making Julia, the subject of the statement, accusative, um, which is kind of weird. Because we're used to subjects being nominative, obviously, but inside of an indirect statement, the subject needs to be a accusative, which is a bit odd. And then the verb, which in this case is just is, would need to be an infinitive. So in Latin, that would just be master or magister dicit, the teacher says, Iuliam esse bonum discipulum. Julia is a good student. So this doesn't seem too bad to me because it's kind of like we're going to have a subject and a verb starting out the indirect statement. And then what follows will be an accusative. And it kind of like feels like a direct object, but it isn't actually a direct object. It is the subject of the indirect statement. And so it is going to be the thing verbing inside of said statement. And it'll probably be right after the verb that is like says, or it doesn't have to be says. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so it's just like, you just got to make those two adjustments, that your subject needs to be accusative, not nominative in the indirect statement, and that your verb needs to be infinitive, not conjugated, which is kind of good for us because it's just like the verb won't be conjugated. We'll just, like, Julia is blah, 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 blah. Like, we don't need to say Juliam est or anything like that. And that's why knowing the tenses of these infinitives is good. So I guess in the future, when I reteach this chapter now, I will teach the infinitive forms at this point. Okay. Well, let's look at some examples. Let's pretend that we have a sentence such as starting out decant, they say. Okay, so I'm going off of how the book showed this, but I don't love this. But just so y'all understand, this is 3 different examples, and these aren't the whole sentence. The part that's after the A, the B, and the C, that's going to be the indirect statement. This is the thing that's starting the indirect statement. So the whole sentence would be decant eam iuvare eam, decant eam iuvisa eam, etc. So how does this work? They say, usually am is translated as him for us. Hopefully that's something at least some of y'all are kind of aware of and comfortable with. But usually it's this accusative masculine form of those nasty third-person personal pronouns. But we don't want to say that they say that him help her, right? So even though it's accusative, we'll translate it as he. It's just accusative because it's the subject of this indirect statement. They say that he is helping her. So there's no word in the Latin that has like a one-to-one relationship with that I'm putting in my translation. And you could technically say they say he is helping her. Like, that's okay. But I really like to use that, especially this chapter when we're getting used to this. Sometimes you're translating and you might get stuck and you're like, oh, how do I start this indirect statement? Like, how do I lead into it? Use that. That's the thing that's going to help you like start the indirect statement, which technically is just he is helping her. So am or ayam at the end here, that's just the feminine version of am. We normally translate it as her. It's going to stay her here because it is the direct object of the indirect statement. And you'll see me doing this. I'm going to try to use this like maroon color for our weird accusative subjects, because it is accusative, but it's not because it's a direct object. It's the subject of our indirect statement. All right, so that's a present infinitive. Now, what if we have a perfect infinitive? That's what this is, this weird new issa ending that we see stuck to the stem of this verb that means to help. That's going to make it to where it's a past tense infinitive. So they say that he not helps her, but helped her, or was helping. No, we should probably just say helped or has helped. They say that he has helped her. It's a perfect infinitive. Again, the indirect statement, like it's nice to kind of think of it as starting with that, and you're kind of putting that in yourself. And then it just kind of follows, and am is this weird accusative subject form. Last example is am utorum esse, and that is a future active infinitive. Remember, I'm just now saying this, but like, don't worry, like they give you this whole chart. We will not see future passive infinitives. I mean, we might see one just so they can, like, the textbook can feel like they gave us one. It's so crazy though. So don't worry about that coming up. But if you see that you are, hopefully we still can think of chapter 23 and think, oh, that looks kind of future tensey. But anyway, so that'd be, they say that he will help her, right? We just make it future tense in the way that we always make something future tense, using the helping verb will. And so pretty straightforward, right? I mean, the only way this isn't straightforward to you is if you're over here like, I don't know that am means him because I don't know my personal pronouns because we skipped over chapter 11 review like really quickly. Or if you're like, I don't really use vare because that's a hard verb to know. But so those are vocab issues though. Hopefully y'all see that the grammar here is actually not too bad. It gets like only ever so slightly more complicated in that, say your verb that means like to say, like somebody saying something, and that's what's starting the indirect statement, is perfect tense. What happens then? It does affect your translation a little bit. So this would, instead of like, they say, this would be they said. And again, picture that the whole sentence is dixerant am, vare am. The part that's after the A, the B, and the C are just the indirect statements. But when you actually see this in sentences, it'll all be together. So dixerant, they said that, I'll still use that to start my thing, like mentally, that's the way I'm going to think of it. They said that this is present, but we don't want to say that they said he helps her. There probably are instances in English when we want to say that same sentence, but it sounds a little weird, right? So what happens is, even though this is present infinitive, you want to knock it back one tense. And I don't know how to say that in a technical way that sounds pleasing or remotely understandable. But so basically, it's just kind of like, even though it's present infinitive, just treat it like it's imperfect. If you think about it, we have this sequence of tenses where like pluperfect is the furthest back in time, then perfect, and then we have imperfect all the way to present. But imperfect is kind of the space between the perfect tense and the present tense. So I don't know if that helps. But it's like you want to knock it back one tense. And basically just make it any kind of past tense. We know that there's like this slippage between perfect and imperfect, but they're kind of the same. And so that kind of carries over here. So they said that he was helping her. See, look, I left out my that. I'll keep it out because, again, you don't technically need it, but it helps me mentally kind of like flow into my indirect statement. So again, even though the infinitive here is just good old present tense, because our initial verb is past tense, we basically just need this to also be past tense. Thinking about it this way with the sequence of tenses is probably overcomplicating it. So you don't have to. But then, okay, so what if our initial verb is past tense, aka perfect, and then the verb in the infinitive is also past tense, aka perfect? Iuvisa here is again the perfect tense infinitive. Shouldn't it have an essa? Oh no, okay, it doesn't have an essa. It's just like a whole form. Okay, but anyway, so this would be, what you want to do is you want to, like, because this is already perfect tense and this is also perfect, the verb inside the indirect statement, you want to knock it all the way back to the pluperfect. So it's like a little thing. But you want to use had basically, because there's no such thing as a pluperfect infinitive. But anyway, so they said that he had helped her, is how we would take this. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like with when the infinitive was present and it already sounded like it was past tense, then if the infinitive is past tense, it needs to be like as far in the past as possible. And now for the coup de grace, what I think is the weirdest thing this whole chapter, and then it's like everything else is easy, is if your initial verb is past tense, but the verb in your infinitive is future, because that's what this guy is. He's got that you are there. He is indeed future tense. You don't want to say they said that he will help her. You want to say they said that he would. It's always kind of weird to me because it's like, what if we did want to say that someone said that somebody will, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Anyway, so you're gonna want to use would, and I think that's like the weirdest thing of the whole chapter because it's a very specific kind of thing. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. Would sort of has this vague future tense feeling to it, like I would do that. It's kind of a conditional thing, like I would do that in the future if blah 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 happens. But yeah, so you want to use would, not will. If so, basically the rule here is that if the head verb, which is our our term for what deco is doing here, and I'm going to explain that further in the next slide for the last little bit of what's going on in this chapter. But if the head verb or the deco verb is perfect tense and the infinitive is future, use would as your helping verb. That's the rule. That's all there is to it. But it is a very specific thing where it's like if you like some of this, the rest of this, you can almost use like logic to kind of work your way through it. But that is a very specific thing. You just kind of have to know the trick there. Last thing, and we won't dwell on it, is if your head verb is future, it's fine. It's not going to really, you're still just going to translate your infinitives like normal. It's only when it's past tense that you have to do these weird shifting, like this, shifting of the tense slightly, like pushing everything back a little bit. But yeah, so deco is third conj, so this E actually makes it future tense, kind of strangely. But so if that's our head verb, they will say that he helps her or is helping her, normal, that's a present infinitive. They will say that he helped her, that's perfect infinitive, nothing weird happened there. They will say that he will help her, so you just use will there. It's not weird in the same way. It's kind of weird when the head verb is perfect. So more head verbs, because it's not just going to be deco. There's different ways to say that somebody is like expressing some idea. So it can be a lot of it is new vocabulary this chapter. Like nego is to deny. It's basically the opposite of to say. So it could be to say, like I say that blah 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 blah, indirect statement. I deny that blah 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 blah, indirect statement. This we don't see too much, but it just means he or she says. I announce that blah 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 blah. I'll stop doing that. But I pronounce, I tell, I narrate that. Insert indirect statement here. I write. So why do they call them head verbs? It's basically things you, I guess, do with your head, if that makes sense. It's just like it's like verbs that express that something is being communicated. And so sometimes it's like somebody's talking, but it could also be writing or teaching or displaying. I display or show. I show that blah blah blah. I demonstrate that. I warn. This one's weird because it can be let's see, I get it mixed up with pello pellera, but it can be seek, right? But it can also be ask, like I ask that. And so there's also head verbs of knowing. I know that, and insert indirect statement here. This is the opposite. I do not know that, indirect statement. I understand, so on and so forth. I guess I don't need to go through all of them. I discern that. I think that. I believe that. Habeo is weird. That probably won't show up. Perceiving and feeling. So any like sense verbs that are related to sense. I hear that, I see that, etc. And some of these are coming from the new vocab, which you guys will need to know by Friday. And so we see they're giving us some new ones. Not iacchio, that just means to be dead. But credo can be a head verb, I believe that, and then an indirect statement. Okay, so that's new. That's rare, and I think it's only every third person. That's why they're saying it's a defective verb, because it's kind of stuck in the third person. Or if it does have first and second person forms, it's just really rare. Nego is this new word that means deny. Nescio is to not know. Nuntio is to announce. Patafaccio is to disclose or like expose. So that's kind of a weird head verb. Putapatare is to reckon. So cogito is to think. Scio is to know, because we got that recently. We're getting the opposite brother of scio now, nescio. But puto is more like to reckon or suppose, think or judge, imagine. Spero is to hope. In chapter, when we got the fifth declension, we got space, spei, for hope. It's like the opposite of despair. So this is like the verb version of it. And 10 minutes, okay, we'll do examples for 10 minutes, maybe a little less. That should be fine. And then suscipio, to undertake. I don't think this is a head verb. Did they say it's a head verb? Yeah, I don't think suscipio is. All right, let's do a couple of examples. I still feel like I explained it pretty decently, and yet it still sounds more complicated than it actually is. So what's this gonna be? Gaius, it's a name, says, and then I bet we're gonna have our indirect statement here, right? And so you could just like launch into it, but for the upteenth time, I like to think of the word that, and that kind of helps me start to think that I'm getting into the statement. Gaius says that. So whereas say would normally be like himself or something, that is a third person. This is funny. When I was okay. That was so rude. Can I be taken out of this chat? Is there a way to silence it? Just get over it. Okay, unless that was one of y'all, in which case, sorry. I guess it's that chat is technical. That's the play group thread or whatever. Okay, anyway, yeah, that's from Sui Sui Say Say. It's like a reflexive, personal, uh, third person reflexive pronoun. So it usually means like himself, herself, itself. But we're going to use it here because Gaius is talking about himself. He's going to say something about himself. So that's all to say. We're just going to translate that as he. Gaius says that he, and now uvisa is from that verb that we were looking at. Uvo, uvare, uv. It means to help. This is the perfect tense infinitive. So we don't want to say that Gaius says that he helps her. It's Gaius said that he helped her. And I'm using that maroonish color to show that say is accusative because it's the subject of an indirect statement. I guess maybe that is sort of annoying, but it is accusative. So we want to like, I don't know, it's like almost a red color, but it's definitely not a red color. So hopefully you can differentiate. But Aeon, she is the direct object of this indirect statement, but he is the subject, and yet he's an accusative. It's the first time that an accusative for us can be the subject of anything. All right, and then what if I just switch the verb there? If I said Gaius said that, and instead of, that's kind of weird. So I'm changing it to am. So he's no longer talking about himself, but he could still be talking about himself. But it's just now we want to use had to translate the uvis. Gaius said that he had helped, blah, blah, blah. Be am or say, it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's do a couple more. Maybe I'll just go until we get kicked. We got 7 minutes. Well, I probably don't need quite 7. Gaius says that, and then what? What's our indirect statement here? It looks like it's gonna be literos, I'll say, scriptos, essa. So something about letters, and letters is accusative, but it's not accusative because it's a direct object. It's accusative because it's gonna be the subject of our indirect statement. Gaius says that the letters, and then scriptos essa. That's kind of weird. But what is that exactly? Scriptos there is from scribo scribera. And so they just took the fourth principle part, and it looks like it's agreeing with literos because that's what it needs to do. But then they throw in that essa there to make it an infinitive. This is the perfect passive infinitive. So it's Gaius says that the letters, and it's perfect passive. So like were written or have been written, say, by him. Says that the letter was written by him. Let's make it letters. I think literosity, even when it's probably technically can be like a single letter, but I'll just make it plural. Yeah, that one's kind of weird. So indirect statements aren't weird at all, but because we have this like we have technically you're going to be seeing like 3 different kinds of infinitives, or I'm sorry, 5. It's way more than 3. And that's the only difficult thing about this chapter, along with whipping out would when your infinitive is future, your head verb is past. But that's kind of it. But yeah, I don't mean to say that it could like, oh, it's going to be so easy. That's a little involved. There's kind of a lot going on with our verbs inside of these indirect statements. But I mean, that's the whole chapter and pretty much the last chapter we'll have. So how is this one different? So this is an exception to the rule. This will be very, very rare. I don't think it'll happen, but it must be an example in the book. That we won't use any of the 6 possible infinitives that we could use. Again, the reason I'm saying 5 is because this one's so rare. This actually is basically a gerundive or a passive periphrastic infinitive inside of an indirect statement. So it's kind of like what we learned last chapter applied to indirect statements. And so it's going to be Gaius says that the letters, not like were written or are written or would be or will be written, but because it's a passive paraphrastic, must be written by you. So it still has that sense of obligation. And that's very rare. That won't show up too much. Let's do a couple more that are probably way easier than that. The students, this is our new word that means like reckon or consider that, and then say, again, we're using this accusative because it's going to be the subject of our indirect statement, but you're just going to translate it as not he or she here, because we wouldn't say the students say that he, like if we wanted to say he, we would use we'd use am, but we're talking, it's reflexive. We're talking about the students. So we want to say the students reckon that they, right? Because the students will be a they since they seem to be plural here. The students reckon that they, and then what's our verb? Amaturos essa must be from amo, amare, to love. But what tense is it if it's amaturos essa? It's future, right? So the students reckon that they will love the Latin language. All right. I want to keep these underlined. Yeah, that was a future one. Yeah, and it shouldn't be too hard to see where your indirect statement is. It's not like a relative clause in that it can be like at any part of the sentence. It's almost always going to be following a very small buildup that usually is just a subject plus a head verb, maybe like a couple of other things sprinkled in, like an adverb or something. But the pattern should be pretty recognizable. The structure should be pretty consistent. The teacher, this is our new word for to know, but it's perfect tense, skio, skire, skivi. So the teacher knew that, I want to use that to mentally start thinking of the indirect statement. The students here is accusative, but it's because it's the subject of the statement. The teacher said that the students, and then, oh, look, we're still future tense, will love Latin. Or I'm sorry, it's not will, okay? It'd be will if, well, let me just show you. I can delete that. Would, right? We're gonna use would. The students would love Latin. And then this is the indirect statement. And let me just show you. This will be like the last thing probably. Oh, yeah, I'm about to get kicked. It's about to get kicked really abruptly, but it's fine. But so like, what if it was like, I wonder if I can squeeze this all together if I have time. But if it was just scribe it, like present tense, then it would be will. That's when you'd use will. So you only translate the future infinitive as would when your head verb is past tense. If it's just present, you just use will, like you kind of like know that you normally would with a normal future tense kind of thing. All right, guys, it looks like I'm about to get kicked. Good luck out there with the rest of your e-learning. I will stream again tomorrow to do more practice. Hopefully this wasn't too confusing. And make sure you watch this. All right, goodbye.